this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Wherever you find us, whether it's a video or podcast on your favorite platform, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. You can also find us on major social media platforms. If you go to miamighostchronicles.com, you can find links to the videos or MP3 files, which you can download and enjoy without commercial interruptions. If you're into classic horror, ghost, and adventure stories, I narrate Nightshade Diary, and you can find links at nightshadediary.com. If scary stories are your bag, and listening to encounters with cryptids, ghosts, dogman, and other weird creatures sends a shiver up your spine, then go to supernaturalstorytime.com for links to our weekly podcasts. Noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy stories, and anything that is just plain weird can be found at eerie.news or visit the Stranger Than Fiction Stories tab at miamighostchronicles.com. Please subscribe to my newsletter on Substack. Just go to mppellicer.com for a link. I want to thank you for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful. Hi, everybody. How's everybody doing? Good, I hope. I'm doing good. You know, everybody asks me, okay, Marlene, give us your weather tips in North Florida. It's still hot, really hot. And we get afternoon thunderstorms. Hey, what can I say? Even now. And it's really funny because I'll be sitting here and I'll hear some loud off thunder. Ooh, and I'll see the wind pick up. And sometimes I hurry out. Oh, let me get this done. Or nothing happens. It blows away. That happens a lot, by the way. You know, where you're like, all right, let me get this done. Because I'm telling you, thunder's like right overhead. And sometimes I think the wind just blows it, real quick. But yeah, we've been getting sometimes too much rain. But what can I say? It's just part of what it is. And I can't believe today is August 1st. It's incredible. And I know people have asked me, Marlene, we know that you're going to do the Halloween show, the live Halloween show, but what are you going to talk about? And I was like, I was thinking about that the other day. So if anybody wants to send me some ideas, I mean, I've already done the significance, the meaning, the origins, whatever, of Halloween, Samhain, whatever, blah, 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 blah. I've done things and I know everybody does the ghost stories and the scary stories, and, I don't know where to go with it. I'm trying to stay away from the regular stuff that everybody reports on, for Halloween. I was thinking, there's monsters came like attached later on to Halloween because it was just Halloween. And I know that, there's people, I don't know. I'm percolating that up here. So if anybody wants to send me ideas that they would like to see me pursue down, that's Halloween related, I'll go with it. If I find that's interesting, I'll go with it. Because, there's, obviously everybody knows about, it being the time where the veil is thin and all that stuff. But there's, there are darker, references to that time of the year as far as, because believe it or not, this was in ancient or pagan, in ancient and pagan societies, or, prehistoric, this was seen as the time of the harvest. In other words, the preparation for winter. By now, or well, not by now, but by Halloween, you were supposed to have harvested your crops. All right. This is when sacrifices were made in preparation of winter. This is the time that the earth was going to sleep. And, there's a lot of ritualistic things behind the timing of it. But of course, we've forgotten all about that. But yeah, especially like you'll see that, Neolithic places, or, that they're known about the cultures. And I'm even curious sometimes, some of these sacrifices that they have found in the bogs, even like in the UK and other areas, they're found all over the place, really. And I know that's impossible to find out when they were done, even though a lot of times they're saying that some of these human sacrifices were done either because there was disease, pestilence, drought, there was something going on which drove that for them to do that. And of course, druids. I did speak about the druids. But anyway, I'll wait. Like I said, and everybody asked me how the pigeons. The pigeons are wonderful. My pigeon babies are beautiful. They're growing. Um, they're, but my other pair. Oh, this is the second pair of eggs they lay. The first ones they went through their whole day. Nothing happened. I said, okay, you know what? This is the first time. So they because pigeons only lay 2 eggs. They laid 2 more eggs. They were supposed to hatch this week. And I looked at them, and there's such a thing that you can do. It's just called candling eggs. Basically, you hold like a flashlight like this type, and of course you have to go into a dark space, and you can hold the egg. I've done it with chicken eggs. You put it up here, and basically you will see if you've got, first of all, depending on how early, you could see the basically the chick develop in there. You can see the veins and the blood. By the same token, you can also see when it's empty. And guess what I found? My second set of pigeon eggs were just a yolk. So I got to talk to my boy pigeon and go, what's wrong with you? It's like, what's wrong with you? He's a young, nice pigeon. And, it's like, yeah, she laid the eggs and they both sit on them, but you got to fertilize the. So yeah, that's my pigeon drama for the week. So anyway, let's get on to the good part. The good part is who is the guest today at Stories of the Supernatural. I am positive many of you have heard of him. His name is Jim Harold. He is a podcaster. Has been around for many years, since 2005. All right. He is among a handful of pioneers of the medium of podcasting. His programs have stood the test of time in the Paranormal podcast, and Jim Harold's Campfire remains among the most popular in the genre. Collectively, Jim's programs have been downloaded over 65 million times. He's developed a loyal following that spans the globe. In addition to his free podcast at jimharold.com, he also hosts a series of premium podcasts on the supernatural and related subjects at jimharoldplus.com. A series of 5 books based on his Campfire series can be found, and I will put the link in the credits of the show. And he just issued the 6th one only a couple of months ago in May of 2024. Help me welcome him. How are you doing today, Jim?
I'm doing well, Marlene. Thank you so much for being so kind to invite me in on the program.
No.
And always great to talk to new people that I haven't had the opportunity to meet yet, and they're great audiences. So thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
If you want to mention, because I was astounded, how many podcasts have you made since you started?
Actually, I told you 2,900
Yes.
that we're going to be active and up and people will be accessing them. There's probably at least another 300 or 400 that they're kind of outdated and things, and we've kind of just, put them in draft mode. And but over 3,000 podcast episodes in the last 19 years. It's been my full-time job for the last dozen years. So, it is very busy. I'm always doing something, but I enjoy it very much.
Because you were issuing podcasts on a daily basis, right?
Pretty much.
Or how often?
I mean, almost. I mean, not quite daily, but pretty close. For example, around now, I've been doing anywhere from 16 to 20 episodes a month. And there have been times I've done even more. So it's and it's a combination of free. I always lead with the free. I want people to listen to the free stuff. Jim Harold's Campfire is probably my most popular show, where people come on and tell their true stories of the supernatural, and that's what my books are based on. I also have the Paranormal podcast, which is my longest running one, where I interview authors and experts. We were talking beforehand. I was lucky enough to have the great parapsychologist Lloyd Auerbach on my very first episode. Yeah. So, I love what I do. I'm very appreciative of the audience, and I'm still fascinated by these topics.
Yes. And you know what? It's really interesting because back then, experts in the paranormal were parapsychologists. That's who the experts, the real experts that went by scientific methodology, and they would send them out to these places to take
like I'm going to use Hollywood. You remember in Poltergeist, the
Yeah.
movie in the 80s,
Yeah.
that they went to the university and they got a parapsychologist to come do scientific. Now everybody's
I
an
kind of
expert,
miss
is what
that.
I'm trying
I
to
mean,
say.
I kind of miss that, you know. I
Yeah.
mean, I kind of like the old days when it's like you watch, because people say what inspired you? In Search Of. When I was a little kid, like in elementary school, watching Leonard Nimoy In Search Of, and they'd always have an interview with like a parapsychologist. And he
Yes.
would stroll in and he'd have like a tweed jacket with the patches on the elbows, and I just love that. I just love that whole thing. That whole, and
Yes.
we don't see that many quote parapsychologists anymore.
No, because
Everybody
not
wants to be a ghost
everybody's an
hunter.
expert. I'm only kidding. But yes, before it was you needed somebody with a, how can I say, an academic background, how's that, or a scientific background to come in and weigh on what was happening and basically say, hey, yes, there's something unusual here, even though they were very hesitant to actually call it supernatural. But yeah, that was usually what you would saw. That was like yeah, things have changed quite a lot since then.
Sure have.
The Let me ask you, as far as the before, you would also the stories, and this is, I think, once upon a time people did have personal stories, but I think they were a little bit more reticent about talking about them,
Sure.
because they were always thinking, I don't want to be looked at as that guy or that person.
Right.
And now people are more forthcoming. It's surprising what some of them have experienced.
Yeah, I mean, even between the time I started doing the Campfire podcast in 2009, because that came down the road a few years later, that was my second show, and it's my most popular show. But the thing is I think people were a little more shy about it, and I think people are more willing to come out and share their experiences, which I think is great. I mean, I think that if somebody's had an experience, and I don't know how many times somebody's called in and had a very unique experience, maybe something you don't normally hear, but then somebody else will call in a month or two later saying, I never told anybody this, but I heard your other guest on, the other caller who said that happened to him. I'm like, wow, I'm not the only one. And if that can, obviously that kind of a show, Campfire, there's a certain entertainment value. People are fascinated by the stories. There's a certain amount of curiosity. But I think it also, and this was not intentional, I never even thought of this when I started, it's just kind of a lucky accident. But I also think it helps people in a sense that they're not alone, that other people experience. Now, I want to be clear, I'm not a psychic, I'm not a guru, I'm not a psychologist, I don't claim to be, but I do like the fact that we've created one space, and there's other ones, of course, one space where people can come on and share their experiences and not fear being made fun of or ridiculed.
Yes. And I think it's, contrary to, let's say, if you want to call it a psychic that supposedly goes around as always having, weird experiences. I want to go with the normies, which this might have been a one-time thing that happened to them. That was it.
Oh,
but
that's
it was
a great
enough
point. Yes.
that they're like, man, I can't, even with their own family, sometimes they don't disclose what happened to them.
I really love the stories that start off with this. Nothing ever happened to me, but there was this one time. Those sometimes are the absolute best stories, I find.
Yes.
And I think and the reason a show like this works is because I think everybody can relate to it in the sense that even the hardcore skeptic, if you really, you've had a bottle or two of beer and you really sit down and talk brass tacks, they might say something like this: I don't believe in any of this stuff, but let me tell you what happened to me. And then they'll tell you like this great story. So I think everybody has a story, and I think that's because it's universal, and I believe it's real.
Yes. Because they're not, how can I tell you, there's, for lack of a better word, it's not that there's nothing in it for them. On the contrary, they've always thought of it as a deterrent. Like, I'm not going to talk about,
Right.
That's how believable it is to them, especially if they've developed a reputation for being a no-nonsense type of person. Or has maybe even kind of like talked like, oh, ghosts, there's no such thing as ghosts. That kind of person, for them to turn around and eventually talk about it, say something, admit to it, because they're afraid that people are going to go, wait a minute, weren't you the one that was always saying there's no such things as ghosts or whatever, fill in the blank. And I guess maybe at some point they decide, well, let's see what happens. What's the worst that can happen?
Right.
I can say, just kidding. I wasn't for real. I was just made that up. And that goes hand in hand, not only with ghost experiences, but with UFOs, all these other type of weird experiences. I know a lot of times people also have that, those sightings of when they have a relative that's passing away or had just passed away, that they have that sighting or that presentiment or something, and they know this family member has passed away. I think that's one of the most common ones I've heard of.
Yes. Actually, my wife had a story. It wasn't exactly like this, but it's a great story, I think. Actually, it took place in 2001. So it was actually, I think, shortly before 9/11. And this was before podcasting even existed, before I was podcasting. So there was no tie-in with my work or what I do. And anyway, my mother-in-law had been quite ill. And they knew she was going to pass away, so she came home to home hospice to her house. And anyway, she'd been home a couple of days, and my wife went over with her. And she was taking care of her, and her mom was in bed. And my wife said, "Hey, I'm going to stay the evening with you. Jim is with our daughter." We had a small 2-year-old at the time, almost 2. And my mother-in-law said, no, you go back home, almost pushing my wife away. Now, what we have been told is that she was on the path to pass, but this was something they were thinking maybe a month away or something. There was nothing imminent. Okay, she was no worse that day than she was any other day. There was no reason to think anything was going to happen. So my wife reluctantly said, "Okay, I'll go home." So she came home, did whatever we did. We went to bed. We're both asleep. She wakes up about 3 o'clock in the morning. And not so much these days. I don't sleep as soundly as I used to, but I used to be, when I was asleep, I was dead to the world. So I was totally asleep. She looked over my shoulder and she said she saw a vision of Mother Mary. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning. And she said it was unlike anything that she'd ever seen before. That Mary was more beautiful than anything she ever saw depicted. And again, unlike anything she ever saw depicted.
Okay.
So she goes away and she's like kind of rubbing her hands. Did I see that? Did I see it? And she was convinced. Hey, I was awake. I saw it. No sooner than that happened, the phone rings. And it's my father-in-law. And she picks up the phone. "Hey, Dad, what's up?" And he says, "She's gone." And my wife is confused. "What are you talking about? She's gone. Who's gone? What? Your mom. She just passed a few minutes ago." Now, that would be kind of remarkable. What's kind of double remarkable about it, to me, is the fact that Mother Mary was a thing for my mother-in-law.
There you go.
My wife is Italian. There are all these different stories about how my mother-in-law honored Mother Mary at her wedding and brought roses to the statue and all these different things. So it was not like it was just any religious symbol. It was one that was very important to her personally. Exactly. And my wife has always taken that as kind of, I guess the official term for it is a shared death experience. Where someone dies and someone else sees something. Sometimes those can be in the same place. Sometimes it can be 10 miles away, 5 miles away, like probably 5 miles away where we were at, or it could be 5,000 miles away. But that's very common. And yet another fascinating example of the strange world we live in.
You will hear that even in hospitals, like exactly like what you said, oncology units or people where they're close to passing away. And you'll even have people that will say, you have family people that will hang on till that one family member arrives.
Right.
Or vice versa. It's almost like they want them to leave, like they want to spare them maybe the anguish. They tell them, sometimes I've even been told by doctors, they've gotten a little bit better. But like very similar to what you said, it's not expected, they're about to die.
Right.
And it's almost like they're waiting, like, go away, like, yeah, go do whatever up, And then the person is waiting almost for them so that they could pass.
Yeah.
And even even nurses sometimes will say, hey, certain nurses, not all of them, will know when there's certain patients that they know ahead of time will be passing away, even if that person doesn't really have any immediate downturn. How's that?
Right.
It's-
No,
yeah.
no, I think that's the thing. There were stories that we've had on the show, and I know there's stories out there that there would be in this one. I think it was some kind of senior facility, and a little girl would be seen in
Yes.
people's rooms, and when that little girl was seen, that person would pass away. I don't know
Yes.
what that means or what the significance of it was, but that's the
I
account.
heard one story similar to that. And I can't remember if it was a hospital or, like you said, a nursing home or some type of setting like that, where they had one lady, she's passing away, and she's calling the nurse, and she's telling her, hey, you need to get rid of this. There's this kid in here. There's this little kid you need to get. And the nurse is like, there's nothing here. You
Right.
know,
Right.
the person passes away, and they bring in a new patient a couple of days later, and she's buzzing the nurse again, and the nurse comes over and is like, there's this little girl in here. What is she doing in here? And the nurse is like, in other words, they were like, this person had no contact with a prior patient that had passed away, that had said, I saw this little girl in there. And in other words, and this was a place where you normally would not say, oh, there's a stray kid running around,
Right.
So this is,
it's amazing. I think, people say, well, what did you learn? What have you learned so far from doing these shows for, a pretty considerable amount of time? And I said, well, I haven't learned a lot. I mean, I can't tell you exactly what a ghost is or exactly what a UFO is or what a cryptid is. We cover all those things and more. But I can say that the nature of our reality is far stranger than we realize. We had a guest who, unfortunately, he recently passed, but he had a saying on his Facebook page, and I don't know where it came from. Maybe it was his, I don't know. But the quote was, not only is the universe stranger than we imagine, it's stranger than we can imagine.
that's pretty good.
And,
That's pretty
yeah.
good.
And the thing to me is that kind of says it in a nutshell, because I think our reality, or what we see or what we perceive as our reality, is just a small sliver of what life is really, what's really going on.
Yeah. Yes. Sometimes, and it's the unexpected stuff. And that's what I'm saying. Contrary, when people go legend tripping or they go to a place that's supposedly haunted, that's different. You might be primed, to experience things. It's when you're not looking for it, or when you're in, like, at home.
Those
or
are
in a
some
place.
of my favorites. Those are some of my favorites when people aren't saying, oh, I'm going on a paranormal investigation, which is nothing wrong with that. I mean, as long as you're respectful.
Yeah.
And, if you don't know what you're doing, don't go into private homes messing with spirits, I would say.
Oh, no.
But I mean, if you're doing public places and things are set up and you're having fun and legitimately trying to understand the phenomena, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. But I think that respect is an important thing. But to your point in what I was saying is that, I think the stories where people are just going about their everyday lives and something really weird happens. We just had a story that aired on today's show that we just released today, where a woman was working, I forget where it was at, but she had a poltergeist at work, and if I remember correctly, she really hadn't seen a lot in different things, but this particular time there was a poltergeist where she worked. Now, she didn't go to work and say, oh, I want to experience a poltergeist.
Right.
But she did. And I think that's extremely interesting when those things happen.
Did she? Well, there was one time, and I don't know if you ever heard of it, Art Bell, may he rest in peace.
Oh, of course I've heard of Art Bell. He is the person who, I think anybody who does this, whether it's a radio show or a podcast, that's the one that we really need to thank, because he I know there were people before did some stuff like Long John Neville up in New York and things, but really Art Bell is the guy who created this talk genre. He's kind of like, and some younger viewers may not, I can't believe it, but don't know or don't realize who he really was. But Art Bell was the Johnny Carson of paranormal talk.
Yes.
He was the
and
man.
supposedly these overnight hours were supposed to be dead time, no pun intended, for radio. It was like that
Yeah.
he made the show what it was, that Coast to Coast. I mean, no, well, I want to mention, that one time Art Bell had a poltergeist experience at his home
I didn't know that.
where he starts, and he talked about it on one of the shows where all of a sudden he heard a pound. He lived out in the desert, out in Pahrump,
Right, Pahrump. Yeah.
and all of a sudden he had this pounding on his door, and he was like, "What is that?" If I remember, he had an interview, I think the night before. I want to say with God, I think it was a witch or some very unusual person, and he was totally wigged out, because it was like all of a sudden, wait, it's different when I'm talking to somebody about it versus I've got this weird pounding on my door that there couldn't be any source for it because I believe his wife was asleep. There's nobody there to have done that.
Right.
So yeah, he had his own firsthand experiences with weird stuff himself.
Yeah, he definitely was the man. There's no question about it.
Yes, yes, yes. And in what I really liked also was that besides interviewing, he would read the stories that people would fax him, because this is the time of the faxing.
Yeah.
That people would fax him, and he would, go ahead and read them out. And I think that was a nice, like you said, the average person contributing
Right.
about their own experiences.
Well, the thing is that with Coast to Coast AM, I've been fortunate. I've been on there a dozen times as a guest. But unfortunately, it was after Art Bell was off the show. So, I never got to talk to him. I've interviewed George Norrie. I interviewed the late Ian Punnett, who passed recently. Very sad. Richard Serrett, of course, different hosts. Dave Schrader, I know, who hosted for a while. Jimmy Church, who was a fill-in host. I know a lot of those guys, but that's one regret. I never got to interview Art Bell.
Yeah, even his Midnight in the Desert show went, fizzled out after he passed away, which was a shame.
I really think that with Coast to Coast AM in the 90s, it was before the internet. I think it was something that was, I think they still do a great job, and I'm not running them down, but there was something special about that show in the 1990s because there was nothing else like it.
Yes.
There were no podcasts, period. There was nothing like it on radio. Art Bell was the perfect host. So there was just something about Coast to Coast AM in the 90s and the early 2000s that I think is very hard for anybody to capture, and that includes any podcaster. I don't think any podcaster out there can recapture what Art Bell did. I think it's like a moment. It's like the Johnny Carson Tonight Show.
Let me ask you something. And I compare this to time. This was also the years of the X-Files.
Yeah.
All right. And that's, I think that's why it became so popular, because it was introducing ideas and stories that I wonder how did Chris Carter's, well, now in hindsight, of course, did Chris Carter speak to people like about their weird stories? Because some of the stuff that he came up with, besides the actual UFO theme that ran through the series, was all these, separate episodes about weird stuff,
Yeah.
and
amazing show. Just an amazing show. And I do think it opened people's mind, even though it was fiction. I would compare it to, let me give you a comparison, Star Trek. Star Trek in the 1960s. Subsequently, it was even more popular in reruns. That's what I grew up with, the reruns. But that inspired a lot of people to go into the space program and astronomy and many inventions. If you look at the form factor of like the old flip phones, they look like
oh my God, yes, I've seen that. You look at that and you're like, wow.
It's like that's Captain Kirk's communicator.
Yes.
But in the same way that Star Trek inspired people to look to the stars and pursue spacely kind of pursuits, I think X-Files made people think, okay, well, this is fiction, but there's a kernel of truth here. And
how much of this has got a truth
we know
thing in
that
it.
Area 51 is a real thing. We know that there have been a lot of UFO sightings. There's ghostly sightings. There's strange cryptids. Let me check into the real thing. And I do think it was kind of like, it's not a nice term, but gateway drug to really looking at these things in reality.
Sure, the possibility of before, it was
Yeah.
the Hammer movies where you would see. But yeah, it was. And of course, the characters they created with Scully and Mulder, and they were like in this case, Scully was a prototypical scientist who was going to debunk it. But still, whoever was cooking up the ideas and of course, there was always that, what's the word I'm looking for? Which even now we find it, especially with UFOs, like government suppression. Oh, the government doesn't want you to know about this, and all that crazy stuff.
Yep.
So I think it spoke to like the conspiracy theorist and everybody, like, I knew it kind of deal.
Well, there's a lot of things I'm not conspiratorially minded about, but UFOs, I probably am.
Yeah, I know. I think
that
that everybody at this point is.
I think a lot has been hidden.
Yeah.
And the funny thing, and kind of to my point earlier, I don't know what's going on. I used to think UFOs, I was kind of like, oh, UFOs are space aliens. I mean, of course,
Yes.
I always accounted for a certain amount of it being military. Certain amount of it is people, just good people, but they looked up and saw a planet and thought it was a spacecraft.
Right. Yeah. Exciting.
And then there was those ones that you couldn't explain away. And I thought maybe in some of those cases, it's very possible that they're ETs. And they may still be. But the other thing that I've been thinking a lot about lately is this idea of crypto-terrestrials that come from below the ocean floor. Because now we're hearing more and more about transmedium objects that go from the sky to the water.
Right.
We're hearing
underwater.
about USOs, unidentified submersible objects.
Yes.
So what if we've been looking up all the time and we should have been looking down?
Down.
Or
Well,
maybe it's a
all
mixture of
the
both.
Bermuda Triangle, the Black Triangle up in the Great Lakes, that they've got a whole set, besides the disappearing ships, they've got a list of supposed sightings underwater.
Yeah, the one that was when I was a kid, and I'll say I was a kid in the 70s, Leonard Nimoy, but really big at that time was the Bermuda Triangle, and I was absolutely fascinated. I would get the books, the Charles Berlitz books, and read all about the Bermuda Triangle. And the one case that really kind of holds up over time, I always get the number mixed up, but I think it's Flight 19. And
Yes.
it was some...
The one over the Great Lakes?
Yeah. Well, no. This was down in the Bermuda Triangle.
Oh, is this the one with the squadrons?
Yes.
Okay.
And they were training. And
Yes.
there were weird radio transmissions, and I don't believe they ever found
Well, the rescue
vestige of
people
it.
that went out after them also disappeared, which
yeah.
is because they
And
kind of
that-
tried to blame the first one on, like you
Right.
said, but like what happened to the rescuers?
Yeah, exactly. So that's one of those things. Flight 19. That's right.
Right. And I've even heard that they ended up in other words, they're not under the water, that they got confused and they ended up crashing into land. But again, there's no trace has ever been found one way or the other.
One of my early shows was with a guy who, and I interviewed him years later. His name's Bruce Gernon, and he said that he flew through the Bermuda Triangle. And I don't want to misquote the specifics, but he flew through and he flew into what he calls an electronic fog. And it messed with his instruments, and it made the timing of his flight all wrong. And just really interesting. And he wrote a book about it called The Fog, and I think he may have written a follow-up book to that. But
Right, and that's one thing I've heard about like you said, not the machinery, the mechanical stuff, even the compass
right
goes
spin,
berserk.
those kind of things. Yeah.
Well, here's one. This is a guest I had. His name is Dr. Bruce Rapuano, and
I've interviewed him. Yes.
You've had, okay. You know that he has a book about alien contact.
Yes.
And we got on the subject about, and I was telling, well, one of the things that I don't get is this thing with the cattle mutilations. How many times do they need to, blah, 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 blah. He goes on to tell me that the proteins in a cow or a calf's brain is like the ideal, and I'm making stuff up. I'm paraphrasing because he's more scientific. Basically, it's the ideal, like if you're going to grow something, this is what you would use. And I was like, what? In other words, if you're in a laboratory setting and you're trying to grow something, whatever it is, the proteins from the bovine brain is like the ideal starting point. And I was like, okay, that puts a whole new spin on it.
Right.
Because joking, I was asking, that thing about the cattle mutilations. I don't know. It's very weird, but how many times can you pick up, cows and mutilate them for what?
Right.
When he told me that, I was like, okay, now that I wonder. There's always a slant to it, depending on who it's coming from, where you're like,
yeah,
is that why they're doing that?
I love when I have a guest who makes me think. The thing about that is the bloodless nature of a lot of those,
Yes.
because a lot of the debunkers say, oh, well, they were just mutilated by some kind of wolf or something, some kind of other animal, which would make sense in general, but there would be blood.
Yes.
And there is no blood. They're very clean
They're
cuts.
ensanguinated.
I've heard it described as laser-like cuts, like they were cut with a laser.
Right.
And that's where it gets really, really weird.
And they say they take the parts of the cattle which are the least valuable, like the tongue, all the udders, the things that they take. They say of the whole entire animal, this is the less valuable if you look at it for the purposes of meat, which of course. And I know they've taken, let's say, tissues from these cow, like to test, was it a sick animal? They've come back sick. There was one, was it Texas or Missouri though, that they did find evidence of barbiturates in it, which you're thinking something to make it go to sleep. Like what? That's weird. But in other words, there was nothing there to say, okay, this was a sick animal, like you said, that died. Also that, and that predators in the areas don't touch the carcasses, I think is very unusual, because predators by their nature, whether they're coyotes or whatever's out there, something like cattle goes down and they immediately race over. And it's like, hey, chow time.
Yeah.
And they stay away from it. As a matter of fact, they say some of these ranchers now have gotten to the point that they take it as it's going to happen. And they just leave the carcass out there and they say, no, eventually with time, it'll desiccate and blow away, But they themselves, they know that they don't even... Because normally what they would do is, they'll pull the carcass and bury it, I guess. But if it's far out, they'll just like, hey, it's like, when you have a business that you're going to have some type of loss.
Yeah.
Even though some of these animals are worth a lot of money.
Yeah.
And because they're tired of trying to figure it out. Nobody's ever been able to give a definitive answer.
Yeah.
Why or who's doing
just
it.
Give up on it. Yeah.
Yes. Exactly. And again, I think that's a very unusual thing, like you said, because of, predators, when they go in and they're tearing with teeth or,
right.
they're not going to do a clean
edges,
incision.
There'll be blood, all these things, none of that's there.
Yes. So I think that's one of those mysteries that we were talking about that eventually, maybe one day we'll have an answer. I don't know yet. Things of and I'm gonna touch now on, I want to say one of the most recent mysteries that Dave Pilates has brought forward with people that have gone missing in the national parks.
Yeah.
That everybody's, is it Bigfoot? Is it a serial killer? Is it aliens? It's like, and I've sometimes listened, I'm like, no, because he discounted, he's great.
I also wonder if it's some kind of time slip or something.
Yes.
If you don't mind, I'll tell you a story, which is actually
yes.
probably my favorite all-time campfire story. I've probably told it, I would say, on 100 different shows. I'm probably not exaggerating. And the reason is because it's one of the best, and it kind of gets to this question that you just raised. It's called the Roadhouse Saloon. So, and it takes a few minutes. Basically, It's about our caller, T.I., who called in from Michigan. And every summer she would go to like this campground in Wisconsin and spend, I don't know, a couple weeks, 2-3 weeks, something like that. And one night, her and a friend, his name was Bob, decided to go see a band that was playing about an hour away. And this was a rural area, all 2-lane roads. So they drove up to this place. And this is in Wisconsin. And they watched the band. Everything was great. They actually stayed a little bit late because they're both musicians. and they talked with him. So, they headed back out around 3 o'clock in the morning. Everything's closed, 2-lane roads. You talked about Art Bell later. That's a perfect scenario to listen to Art Bell or Jim Harold's Campfire because it's all dark, it's all deserted, it's kind of spooky. So we were driving, and T.I. says, "Hey, Bob, I've got to go to the restroom." And Bob kind of looks around and said, "Well, unless you want to pull up a tree, you're kind of out of luck." And she said, "No, just drive fast." So they go another 10 minutes maybe, and they see this bar that's open, and the joint's jumping. There are cars in the parking lot. There are neon signs. You can hear the thump, thump, thump of the music. And they're like, it's after 3 o'clock. That shouldn't even legally be open, but let's check it out. So they pull in, and Bob and T.I. go in. T.I. goes to the restroom. Bob goes and gets a soft drink or something from the bar. And Bob mentions, "Hey, I'm really glad we came here because there's this big mural on the one side. And it is an Old West scene. And I've heard about this, but I've never got to see it, so I finally get to see it." And it was there. It was a big Old West scene. There was a bar, and there was what they called a dance hall girl back in the day, and a bartender and those kind of things. And they were looking around, and they noticed something odd. Everybody in the painting had a corollary with the real people. The dance hall girl, there was a woman standing at the bar, same person. There were some guys playing pool in the real bar. They were playing cards in the painting, so forth and so on. So then it starts to get even weirder. There's this guy who puts I want to say a quarter. I don't think it was that long ago, but puts some money in the jukebox and plays Chubby Checkers Let's Twist Again. And it's an old style bubbler jukebox, Wurlitzer with the beautiful kind of rainbow look. And anyway, he walks over to T.I. and he says, and he smiles real big, and he has all rotten teeth, T.I. said. And he says, "Want to dance?" And T.I. held up, she had a cane. She said, "I don't do much dancing." And she said she was really glad she had her cane in that instance. So anyway, just the people are kind of like this. They're not really engaging. They're just kind of blankly. They're just kind of weird. So they sit there a while longer and they talk, and then they start looking at this painting again, and they notice something that didn't seem to be there at first. There's these swinging bar doors, like, they have in the old Westerns. "Hey, I want to see Sheriff Bart,"
Yeah.
So anyway, there's two, columns of mist in the door. And they thought that's weird. One's quite a bit shorter than the other one. And they keep talking, and they look back. And it seems to be developing in like a Polaroid picture, and one appears to be a man and one appears to be a woman. They talk some more and they look some more, and then that's when T.I. gets really tuned into this because the woman has curly hair, T.I. has curly hair. T.I. has cowboy boots. This figure has cowboy boots. And then she saw it, the clincher, the figure. The female figure developing into the picture had a cane. And with that,
ganger.
T.I. said, "We're out of here." And her and Bob go out. Now they said, or T.I. said, when she closed the door, everything went black, right? It looked like the place had never been open. And when they were leaving, the people were kind of motioning, "Come back, come back." So they closed the door. Bob goes to get the car in the parking lot, which when they came had a bunch of cars. When they left, had one car, their car. Now that would be a weird story, but it's not over yet.
Yes.
So T.I. is way braver than I am. So she says, "You know what?" Because she's telling her friends and family about this, and they're like, "Come on, She's like, "I'm going back." So she gets, I think, her sister or friend, and they go back a couple of nights later. She goes back about 8 o'clock at night. She doesn't wait till 3 o'clock at night. So she goes in, and sure enough, they have a jukebox, but it's not a Wurlitzer bubbler jukebox. It is what would have been at that time a modern CD jukebox.
Okay.
She walks up to the bar, and there's a young lady bartending, and she talks to the young lady. And she said, hey, I was in here the other night. The joint was jumping. It was very late. And there was this real young, like farm boy looking, strapping young guy bartending. And the bartender said, he wants to have someplace else. We don't have anybody by that description of bartends. The only people that bartend are me or my elderly father. And with that, T.I. left. Now, I used to say she'd never been back, but I do believe she went back. Now, here's the thing. This even adds more credibility to it.
Okay.
First of all, the place really exists.
Right. Okay.
The researcher, Chad Lewis, cryptozoologist, he's excellent and he's a great guy. He actually took pictures, went to the place and took pictures. Okay. Now, the misty columns were not in the doors. T.I. and Bob weren't in the doors, but everything else was just as she described. And I was kind of inspired by that. And because she probably told me this story in 2011 or 2012, probably 2011. I went up to Michigan and met T.I. in person, and we did a video. And it's actually on my YouTube channel at youtube.com/Jim Harold. I was going to know if the V's in there. Now it's just youtube.com/Jim Harold. Anyway, she recounted the story, and, I don't want to reveal too much about her background, but she was retired from a very respectable profession, someone that you would look up to and admire. I met her and her husband. They were kind enough to welcome me into their home to record the video where she retold the story. I believed her 110%, and I still believe her to this day. Now, I don't know what that was, but circling back to what you were talking about. People disappear all the time, and that's exactly what T.I. said. She said people disappear all the time.
Is that what? Let me ask you, what did she think it was?
She didn't know. She said,
but did she think it was like a time,
dimension? She mentioned those as possibilities. It's almost a direct quote. She said something like, people disappear all the time, and had we disappeared, people would have thought we ran off together. They would have thought, whatever. But maybe it's time slip. Maybe it's another dimension. She said she really didn't know, but those were some possibilities that she had thought of. So I don't really know. But
Soul trap, come in here. Hotel California.
Yeah.
Except it's a roadhouse.
Yeah, or the Roach Motel. No.
Yeah, something like that. Exactly.
That's using a dated reference, but I do that a lot.
Yes. That's such a good story. That is such a good story, because what we were talking about, where you hear about what he was describing, mostly, of course, taking place in these. And I mean, as a matter of fact, the other day I was. I don't know if you've ever heard of the search for Fenn's treasure.
No.
This was a gentleman that I want to say was 2010. He had been out in Arizona, New Mexico. He had retired from the Air Force, and for many years he ran like an art gallery and had antiquities from the Southwest. Very successful. He had big stars out there. And away in 2010, he was 80 years old. And he says he puts together supposedly a box of treasure. He describes what it is and released a book. And in the book is a poem giving hints of where he stashed this at. All right. And he, gives, almost like a Nostradamus type of thing. Like, not that direct. Bottom line, there was even forums trying to figure out the clues.
Sure.
It was supposedly the contents were going to be worth maybe a couple of $1 million. So this was like the treasure hunt fever thing took over. Bottom line, though, the point I'm trying to make, in the process of this, 5 people died trying to find this treasure. And my point being, some of the crazy stuff that people go into out in the wilderness and in or parks. When I say parks, I don't mean totally like that. And by the way, these sometimes were young men. And in this case, they were all men. There was no women. That one woman got lost and she spent the night out in the forest, but the next day they found her. But all 5 people were men. But that they were not like older, that you could say young, lost their lives because they would get themselves into these situations, and that they just, whether you want to call it fate or just a couple of drowned, fell off, cliffs that they were like hiking in these parks.
Right.
My point being, yes,
Yeah.
you can do the time slip, and then other times, I hate to say it, it's just sheer bad luck or
Yeah. Well, you got to be, that brings about a point with paranormal investigation. And I'm not a paranormal investigator. I don't claim to be. I'm just not. It's not interested me as much. I mean, I think for what I do, I like having a little bit of distance from it. It's kind of like, and I'll get to my point in a minute, but to me, it's like a sportscaster, right?
right,
If you watch a football game, typically there's two, usually guys, calling the game. And a lot of times, one of the guys will be a guy that played the game, and I think they give great insights you can't get any other way. And
right,
then there'll be like the regular broadcasting guy who never, threw a football in his life, but he's a great broadcaster and he can communicate well. And I think
right,
that's a great mix. For me, what I do, I equate, people who ghost hunt and those kind of things and then having podcasts or radio shows. They're kind of like that sports guy. And they've got one perspective. And I think that's very cool. What I think someone like me, who is not a paranormal investigator, can bring to the mix is a little more arm's length. I'm not locked into
exactly.
one theory. I have a broader perspective. So I don't really want to be a paranormal
Or the
investigator.
alternative to whatever.
Right.
Which,
The
by the
other,
way, part of that story is, like all treasures that are cursed.
yeah.
Part of that I want,
Yeah.
and I don't know if you've run across stories of that nature where,
Oh, yeah. Yeah, yeah,
you
yeah, yeah.
know,
The other point I was going to make, though, is that when people are paranormal investigating, and I just was talking to a gentleman, Dale Kazmarek, today, who's been
yes,
doing it for 50 years. And he basically said, you should have two people not because of a ghost, but if you fall down a flight of stairs, you have to, when you're doing things like paranormal investigating, you have to be more afraid of snakes and rotten floorboards and stuff. I mean,
yes, yes, you do.
there was one years ago, I used to do a show called The Paranormal Report, and I can't remember, but this had to be, 2011, 2012. There was this couple out legend tripping or something, and they were near a railroad, and I think the woman lost her life.
Yes, that's
Legend
off
tripping.
I think it
Yeah.
was Goat Slick or something like
I'm
that.
not sure where it was, but lost her life, trying
Yes,
to look for kind of paranormal thrills. And it's
yes,
like,
yes.
be
Yes, there
careful
will.
out there and use your head. Nothing wrong with,
Oh,
exploring and things in safe
I'm
places, but use your head.
I was doing paranormal investigations since the 1990s, and then I mean, and I still consult in the background. If people will call me to talk to me and ask me questions about certain stuff. But I know exactly what you mean because I've talked about it. When people like, oh, wanting to join paranormal teams, and I said, yeah, that's all great, but you got to make sure you go with somebody that's experienced. And I'm always thinking, and I said, but sometimes you have to worry about location and live people, especially sometimes people go to these deserted or abandoned, you could have squatters.
Yep.
Out here in Miami, they had a young gentleman. There was an old hospital that was abandoned. And, of course, everybody goes there. He fell through from the third floor through, what do you call it? The stairwell, because it wasn't the lighting, first of all, is not good,
Right.
but exactly what you said. Nowadays, trespassing could be a problem. You can get yourself arrested.
Right.
If
Well, it's like I've seen on YouTube, these people who go to abandoned malls. It's like,
yes,
and it's not for a ghostly thing. It's just for what they call urban
yeah,
exploring. And
urbex,
it's just like,
yeah,
dude, what are you doing? You're putting yourself
yes,
at great risk. And it ain't yours to go on, I mean,
yes,
it is kind of sad when you see some of those things and
yes,
how things that were
yes.
gleaming and pretty and fun are just kind of in this kind of twilight zone state
Yeah,
of
there's
disrepair.
the once upon a time, because I was one of those where you'd spend the day at the mall. It was great,
Yeah,
yippee,
yeah.
and
And now
that's
they're
kind of gone
ruins.
by the. Yeah, that's like, hey, I remember it was like you'd spend the day shopping, eating at the food court, people watching. Once upon a time, that was a great pastime to go to the mall.
Yeah.
But but the thing about the legend trippers or people doing their own paranormal stuff, there's exactly like what Dale Kazmarek was talking about, that things can happen to you. You could trip and fall and break your ankle. I mean, I know
Or
it
worse,
sounds,
or worse,
especially if you're walking around some place where the lighting is not there.
right?
Yeah, a lot of people don't like to think it's so unghostly. What do you mean? I'm not going to experience something frightening. It's like, yeah, well, this is really frightening if you think about it, especially if it's some of these locations which are very remote.
Yeah.
Where people say, there's this old country cemetery down that dirt road about 5 miles out.
Right.
And if you really want to get some great EVPs, head out there.
That reminds me, because I know we're coming close to the end of our time, that reminds me of a campfire story that we actually just aired today that tied into what you just said. And it's a short and sweet one, but it's kind of cool.
Yes, go ahead.
So this guy, I figure he's in his 30s now, but he was talking about when he was in high school. And sometimes towards the end of high school, you've finished all your work, and when you're almost done in your senior year and you have like a couple weeks where they kind of just keep you, but you don't really, they might send you on a special project or whatever. So somehow he had all this free time in the last couple weeks of high school. So him and his friend just started, this is down in Kentucky, just started like exploring the woods and stuff. So this one day they're exploring this place with all these old houses and all these old ruins and stuff, of these houses that had been abandoned, 50, 60 years earlier, finding different little artifacts. And all of a sudden, and they're in the middle of the woods, so this is not where people would be walking around normally. They see this guy, or my caller saw this guy, an older gentleman looking at them in a 3-piece suit.
Oh, boy.
Fully dressed in a 3-piece suit. So anyway, they get down off the hill or wherever it is, and I'm paraphrasing, but my caller says to his friend, he said, "Hey, I got to tell you something." He's like, "Did you see that guy in a 3-piece suit too?"
Yeah, it's like, all right. I mean, see that right there. That's like, I mean, like you said, like, what is he? Who is he? Or what does he do?
Yeah.
He's like, or is that his burial suit?
Yeah, scary.
That is such a good story. That is such a good story where people come across the unexpected.
And some of those are the simple. I mean, the other story is very elaborate, great story, but some of those kind of stories are great too. Just a very simple story. But what was that?
Yes, and some people, I know sometimes a lot of people say, "Well, why doesn't he find out? Why doesn't he go up?" You'd be surprised. Most people, their first instinct is to, "I'm getting out of here. Yeah. I don't want to find out."
There's one more story that's kind of similar.
Yes.
and then this is from several years ago, so I might not get it exactly right, but here's the gist. This woman, and she was probably, I'm guessing, in her 60s, and this happened to her maybe in the 50s or 60s. She was a little girl. Okay. And she was driving her bike, and she had some kind of mishap. I don't remember the specifics. Okay. And she was by herself, and she called out for help. And like this guy and this elderly man in a brown suit came and helped her. So anyway, fast forward 30, 40 years later, I think she was bringing her mom home or something from the hospital. And something was wrong. Her mom was stuck in the car, couldn't get out of the car. There was some kind of distress, and there was a lot of kind of gnashing of teeth, and, it was not a good situation. And she kind of cried out for help. And she looks up and she sees the same guy, the elderly guy, in his brown suit. And then her mother somehow got free and was able to get out of the car or whatever it was. And she looked up and the guy was gone. And she has no idea who the guy in the brown suit is.
Yes, exactly. And you hear very frequent stories like that of angelic helpers that sometimes don't necessarily look like angels, as you think of an angel with a wing kind of deal.
Yep.
But these strangers that show up, help, then disappear. And it just so happens that one person is the only person that can remember seeing them.
Yeah.
And, they're looked on as angelic helpers. Jim, for my podcast listeners, what's the best way to find you? Where should they go?
Well, if they listen on podcast app, just look for Jim Harold, just like it's spelled on the screen. If you're listening, HAROLD, Jim Harold, or Jim Harold's Campfire. I think that's the show most people will enjoy the most, those true stories. Yes. Also, the Paranormal Podcast, and they can find me on YouTube as well, Jim Harold. Yes. And, of course, jimharold.com. And if they want to pick up a copy of any of the books, True Ghost Stories 6,
Yes.
or 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and you don't have to read them in any order. They can go to
Yes.
Amazon or jimharold.com, and each one of them are standalone, so you can read them in every order, and they'll have, this one has 65 stories from the show.
Wow. That's
Of our
great.
favorite stories from the show, and hope they get to check it out. And Marlene,
Yes.
thank you. It's been a lot
Absolutely.
of fun.
It's been
before you
great.
said
It's been great.
you like to make it a conversation, and that's what I
Yeah.
felt like I was just having a fun
Yeah.
conversation with a friend about spooky stuff.
Yes,
And is there
absolutely.
anything better than that?
So I'm going to ask you this, but I think I know the answer. Are you going to be writing more books though, and more things? Because I'm sure you have.
Yes. Oh yes. The funny thing is, I said this the other day, to someone. People will say, "Oh, you've been doing it such a long time, and you were, one of the very first." And as far as I know, the Paranormal Podcast is the longest running paranormal podcast. On the
Yes, I
internet, as far
believe
as
so.
know.
Yes.
But anyhow, because there were people before me, but they've quit long
Right.
ago. But the point is, there weren't many, but there were a few. But the point of it is, people think, well, he's yesterday's news. Well, I don't plan on being yesterday's news. I am going stronger and harder than I ever have. And I want to, keep doing this maybe another 15 years, I think. That's where I've got my mind on. So I'm nowhere near done yet.
I'm going to tell you something though. I think you were outstaged today though. I'm going to tell you by what.
I think I know. Every time they always upstage me, the jellyfish.
Yes. Oh my God.
Oh, everybody loves the jellyfish.
Okay. My video viewers are going to know what I'm talking about, because I'm sure they've been doing the same thing as me. It's like, Jim's talking, but what are they doing? Is that one or two?
And they're not real. They're not real.
I know,
Obviously,
but
do that,
let me tell you something. I'd be like, I could see myself spending a long time just going, huh? Yeah. Oh yeah. Or maybe listening to a podcast and at the same time looking at the jellyfish.
I was interviewing a marine biologist recently, and she said, "Oh, I've got a podcast coming. I'm gonna have to get those." And I'm like, "Don't steal my bit." No.
Let me tell you something. That. When I was looking at it, I said, "No, that can't be real. No, but what is that? That's not a lava lamp? No, what is that?" You're like, but that's great. Let me tell you something. That's fantastic. Wow.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Jim. It has been wonderful to speak to you, and I want to wish you the best of luck in everything.
Thank you, Marlene, and stay spooky.
You better believe it. Take care. Bye-bye. Isn't he great? I love talking to him. I mean, I'm sure there's some of you that when you're, it's like, hey, Jim Harold, I listen to stuff all the time. Yes, it's true. When he was telling me before that he was doing something with his platform, and he was telling me how many episodes or podcasts. I was like, holy crap. Let me tell you, I'm looking at it from the other side of the microphone. I'm looking at it from the producer part, the work that goes into producing that many podcasts, that many episodes. And that's like daunting. All right, daunting. I'm sure you enjoy it. Don't get me wrong, because he himself was telling me, this obviously it wasn't done all at once. It was done over several years, but still, that speaks to the what's the word I'm looking for? Love of the art. Absolutely. You don't do that for that length of time, and for that if this doesn't what is it? Feed your soul. But yes, I get it. I understand it totally. I understand what he's talking about. But yes. And what he said, there's people that go into this, and I'm going to tell everybody, and I know everybody's going to go, Marlene, right now in the year 2024, everybody and their mother plus their second cousin and twice removed has a podcast for different subject matter, whether it's politics or stories or makeup or whatever. There's the YouTubers. I'm not talking like the YouTubers which have the how-to videos. We're talking here podcasts. All right. Eventually, this will go bye-bye. I'm not saying the podcast thing. I'm talking about the people producing it. Because a lot of people will go with how can I say it? Whether it's the how people, they ride the crest of something. Oh, it's the latest thing. And then that's it. When it peters out, they like it, but they don't love it. I love it. Storytelling, I mean, that's in my background because I'm a writer. I've always been a writer. I mean, I've been a writer. And then when I'm talking, this is my manual typewriter, because when I started, I had a manual typewriter. I've been writing. All right. So that's part of my makeup, that's me. But eventually a lot of the people, like he said, that even before him, they fight away. Sometimes, honestly, sometimes people die. It's not like they just stopped doing it. They died, but some people just they're spent. They're like, I don't want to do this anymore. Yeah, it was fun, or it was making me money, or whatever, fill in the blank, but I'm done with it. I mean, that's one of the things I feel bad about with Art Bell, because I've listened to Art Bell since he was producing his shows in the 90s, and then, when he went to the 2000s, and then when he did, I don't know, that he went to the Philippines, and then he came back, and then he did this, and then he did that. And I was like, oh my God, don't do that to me, Art Bell. His format, and I always liked the way he did his shows. And like what we were talking about with Jim was that, again, he took over the airwaves on AM, because remember, Coast to Coast didn't become Coast to Coast overnight. I mean, initially, overnight was usually, I don't know if anybody remembers, most people don't, when TV and radio weren't a 24/7 thing, and usually got relegated to late night, or real early, as in 2, 3, 4, 4 in the morning, 5 in the infomercials, or nothing, dead air, or stuff that was like, nobody's listening to the radio or watching TV. But let's say in this case, listening to the radio at this time. Who's listening to the radio? Turns out a lot of people were. And Art Bell took advantage of this. It's one of those things. And again, this format where he was taking calls from the normies, and not the normies, but you know what I'm talking about. He was taking calls from everybody without a screener, and he kind of, you couldn't say improper things, but, and he would, let me tell you something. I've listened to some of the calls that he knew how to deal very easily with people that were like saying inappropriate things, which were very few, by the way, or stuff that, or when people would meander too long. And but what I'm saying is that this thing with the podcasting, I think you're going to see the people that are going to stay in it for the love of it, for the love of the thing. And then the ones that it's like, okay, the heyday. I think it's always some version of podcasting, or whether even now with Audibles or the radio or anything, is that people like to listen to stories. Different types of stories. Everybody's different. Some people like this type of stories, other people, but everybody likes to hear a story of some type. Right? And even pre-TV, all these radio shows that they would have, which had dramas on them, everything was basically the person's imagination and them listening to the story on the radio, because this was, of course, prior to television. Why? Because people love stories. People love stories. And I think that's a universal human thing. Whether it's I don't know, made up, a fiction, nonfiction. There's people that like to hear like, oh, no, that fiction stuff, that's all, I want to listen to real stuff like the news, or, true story. By the way, and I'm an aficionado of true crime, and I put out a lot of stuff that's true crime, especially unsolved stuff, which, by the way, a lot of the things, all these cold cases are being solved now because of DNA. The use of DNA, these cold cases are being solved because they're either being able to name the name of the victim, and in some cases find the perpetrator, which many times everybody's dead. Everybody's dead, including the families. But at least, there's, I hate that word closure, but that there's some type of resolution, especially if this victim was a Jane or a John Doe, as to who's this person, who was it that, whatever, did whatever to you and threw you in a ditch. But yeah, but all those, everybody has their own niche that you like to. Some people are into current events. I want to hear. I spend part of my day listening to current events because there's so much current events to listen to. But even then, and I'm saying I'm sure not everybody's the same. There comes a point where I like to turn off reality. By this, when I mean reality is like the current events or political or the news or whatever, even the true crime where it's like, let's go off to, you know, weird stuff land, like a ghost story or UFO or, mysteries or what I was telling him about that Fenn's treasure, which by the way, for those of you, I mean, if you want to look it up, I have an article on it. Eventually, in 2020, supposedly a young man, well, not supposedly, I take that back, allegedly, came forward and he had found it. And people accused this guy, the originator Fenn, of basically saying it wasn't real. And he died like 2 months later. He died like 2 months later. He was 90 years old. This treasure hunt had been going on for 10 years. What's really funny is after the first person died, all right, which I think it was in Yellowstone National Park. It's really funny because the first person that, Marlene, I might be, okay, I know that one of the early, if not the first or the second gentleman who got killed because he fell off a ledge or something, and I want to say it was Yellowstone or somewhere around the Grand Canyon, the Park Service kept mum about it, that he had been searching for Fenn's treasure. In other words, they reported his death. He didn't come back. His wife reported him missing. They found him. They reported it as he had taken a fall, etc., which can happen to anybody. But they kept it under wraps that what he had been doing out there was searching for Fenn's treasure. Park Service. And then eventually it came out. And instead of being number one, they put him as number 4 of the people that had died. And after the first person that was known that he had died, he was out, I believe I think there was one gentleman, he died he drowned in the Rio Grande. Again, because the area of the not the map, but the poem that kind of gave you directions was in the southwest area. Everybody's making their own deductions. People, and that's another thing. People go out there alone. There was only the last one that went out, 2 of them, and one of them survived and the other one didn't. And the last one, he survived because they were stuck out in the snow without food and everything. He drank his own urine, and that's why he survived. And they were rescued the next day. And ironically, they were a mile away from their vehicle. Okay, but anyway, after the first death, the family of that man had asked Fenn, who was alive at that time, please call this off. And he said, this is dangerous. In other words, he could, and up to a certain point, I can kind of understand it. Because he says, I've always said that it's in a place where an 80-year-old could go to. All right, in other words, this is not a dangerous place. Like, in other words, don't think that because it's a treasure, it's going to be in a very difficult to access location. All right. Which, by the way, the young man, because he was, when I say young man, that finally came forward, I think it was 2020, something like that, as being the one that found it. The other people had to sue and to get them to disclose who he was. And as I think that they have never said where he found it, supposedly. And again, like I said, the originator of the whole idea died. And that feeds into, there's always these stories of these superstitions, if you want to call them, about cursed treasures, or anybody gets close to it. One of them, as a matter of fact, lately that I found out about was the lemon mines, the lost lemon mine up in Canada, right there around where it borders Montana. That's another one that's got some mystery attached to it. But yeah, there's always been this aura of like curses, or like if you get too close, one of those deals. But yeah. But anyway, yes, I like Jim Harold, I hope to be around for quite a while, having these interviews, writing articles. talking about unusual things. Like I said, I believe, despite all our technological advances and everything being, what is it, recorded, scanned, you can't, everything, they know everything about us. I think there's a part of our soul that yearns for the mystery of mysteries. Whether it's a good ghost story or a mystery or, um, discovering something that you didn't know about. I think all of us, that's part of us being who we are, of us as humans. So anyway, guys, I hope I will see you soon again. Yeah, next week. I have a lot of great guests lined up. Some really interesting. As a matter of fact, today, like I said, that interview with Dr. Bruce Rapuano, when we were talking about the alien abduction and everything, and he told me that thing about, and I know I'm not remembering exactly the way he described it, because he's a biologist. This man is like, he knows what he's talking about. Besides having an alien neurobiology, okay, and he's got degrees in, what was it, neurobiology and neuropharmacology and you name it. My point being, though, that when he told me that, it was like, wow, you know what? Nobody's ever made that point about cow brains being so useful in scientific research. It was like, what? And this is me assuming a lot. Is that why supposedly aliens are mutilating cows? I don't know, but it was like, I never thought of that angle. Interesting, huh? Anyway, guys, like I said, thank you for being part of my audience. You're all wonderful, and I will be seeing you soon with a lot of great guests. Till next time, take care.